should we start?
91 to 2018. And it's the death of the Central European University. It's everywhere on Facebook, put on by liberals and Democrats today on Facebook. So it's a very important day, actually yesterday, and the Central European University seems to have to leave Budapest for Vienna. So it's a very tragic day, and it shows where we live now. So I'm sorry for disappointing you after this fantastic morning, but this is a very different mood what we have to now be in to discuss what's going on actually. So it's not so nice anymore for the morning. So this is the death of the Central European University. I am sure you all know the story. Tibor, are you making a video? Or?
Yes, I'm making Facebook Live.
Say hi to all the audience.
Say.
I'm sorry for this very pessimistic start. Maybe the end will be more optimistic. Actually, Tibor gave the title of the presentation, which is a very easy task for me. What we can learn from the past, what we can take for the future, what went wrong in Visegrad, and what can we do better. So it's a very, very easy task. Thank you for this idea. And certainly there is a very easy solution for all these problems, what I would like to present to you right now. It's a sort of obsession what I have actually, that mostly I'm talking now about Hungary. Look at these dates once again, that we are all waiting for the liberal messiah. Someone who might come to Hungary on a white horse actually, probably coming from London, Paris, Utrecht, whatever, a Hungarian, a man or a woman, maybe somehow in between, I don't know, liberal, but he or she should be 43 years old, with a team, a liberal entrepreneur sort of. His team or her team should be a team of experts who know a lot about politics. They have a wonderful Western pro-European perspective, vision, not populist at all certainly. They have a very different sort of business background maybe, bringing in some new ideas to Hungary and to the region, and showing this very different alternative to the electorate. This guy might easily win the election. So that's my easy answer to all this problem. We certainly do not have at the moment this guy. I don't know him or her personally, it's an imagination, but I'm sure one day something will happen. So in that sense, he's serious. No such regimes like Orban's anti-liberal, illiberal, I wouldn't even say democracy, what he calls might not be a democracy anymore. I'm sure that this will not resist all the challenges of the future. So sooner or later this regime will collapse. The problem is that we don't know when. Should we wait 3 more years, 8 more years, 20 more years? I don't know. But history shows that most of you, or some of you, probably will survive him. Honett will definitely survive him, at least. I'm not sure about myself. Okay, so, but I try to be also serious talking about this issue. So what went wrong? And perhaps I will focus mostly on this region, and especially on Hungary, but maybe the lessons are more, general. The history is different on the western and eastern part of the European Union, but tendencies might be somehow still similar. I use this word east in a little bit in a cautious manner, because we call ourselves in the region Central Europeans. So we come from Central Europe. You all know that Prague is more a western city than Vienna. So be careful, especially in the Czech Republic, when you say Eastern Europe. So we say Central Europe, but we are certainly on the eastern part of the current European Union. Once Russia, that was a question yesterday, once Russia would join the European Union in 50 years, certainly Hungary will be on the western part of the European Union. That's another imagination. So anyway, what I want to say that something certainly went wrong. That's clear. So the question is actually correct. On the other hand, I think, and that's my first point, that somehow we liberals, Democrats, mainstream, pro-European politicians, civil society activists, people actually won. So that you might remember that just 10 or 15 years ago, Hungary and Poland belonged to this avant-garde of the new democracies, how we called ourselves just 10 years ago. So time passes very fast. So actually we felt that we won. All the necessary changes, transformation went through, and we all talked about the opportunity to get closer to the traditional, well-developed democracies. Now we live in a very different era again. But why did we lose in case we won? So that's a paradox, I think. Actually, my feeling was already before Orbán came back to power in 2010, or before the political change in Poland, that somehow we won but we lost. Because regarding the mental situation of most of the people, the pessimism, the disillusionment, the criticism, not only towards the ruling government, which is, I think, correct, but somehow the criticism against the system was touchable in the Hungarian political atmosphere. Ordinary people talked about the regime change in ugly words, if nothing had happened. So they felt that it did not bring them anything good. And certainly those of us who, I might say, belong to the elite in some way, did not understand why people do not realize that even multi-party system, pluralism, is a fantastic difference between the communist dictatorship and a democratic regime. But I remember talking to ordinary people who simply said, I don't like this fighting amongst parties. I don't understand why there is no national unity. So then I felt that something went wrong. We might think about education, we might think about the gap between the elites and the people, we might think about economic problems or identity politics. Today, certainly we would speak about identity politics, which is the most important cleavage, it seems to be, at the moment in the United States, in Europe, in most of the democracies, whether East, whether West, whether Central. I think a Polish guy would especially emphasize the importance of identity politics, because in Hungary it's more complicated. In Hungary, the financial and economic crisis hit the country a lot, and there was a clear problem, a real waste of, a real failure of the economic policy, and there was a big drop in Hungary regarding the performance of the Hungarian economy, but not in Poland. And we have a similar populist government now in Poland. And you might have a lot of similar arguments regarding Western well-established democracies where maybe, certainly, there are a lot of problems regarding the economy, especially regarding injustice and inequality and so on and so on. We all know these problems. But somehow, populist movements seem to be stronger everywhere, coming in from the fringe to becoming more well-established parties by today, and it has nothing to do, it seems to be, or not much to do, with the economic performance of the one or two member states of the European Union. Okay, so that's one point. Actually, so my first point is that actually maybe many of us, even understanding the problems, misunderstood the situation, and we did not win. We won because parties got elected, but we could not somehow convince or get the sympathies of the people that we are on the right track, in spite of many problems of a mass democracy presented in the media, which is certainly very important, but in spite of all the difficulties, the most important trend is more or less okay when we have this pluralistic society. So that's my first point, and I don't really know the answer to that. My second point is, does it mean that now we face difficulties? In Hungary we have a party in power which is extremely populist and more right-wing, even we might say far-right, from many aspects, if we analyze politics and policies of Fidesz. Can we say that we should, as liberals and in a broader sense, Democrats, should somehow throw out of the window the old concepts, what we all have? And I don't want to repeat your presentation, but just to mention that certainly that's not the answer. The answer is, however, I think, is somehow to consider and what went wrong, to renew our ideas, to find alternative political and policy ideas for the future. I think that especially for the ALDE party, and maybe especially for ALDE individual members, it would be a great task to have an open debate. What went wrong? Was it how the crisis was managed? Crisis management was a problem? Austerity measures were a problem? Or was it something very different, again, on a more symbolic level, at a more symbolic level? Let's say liberals do not talk about the nation. I would be very careful with that. I wouldn't say that's the answer. But I just want to refer to some people who already started this job. It's not me who is starting it. There is already a literature that when people like Timothy Garton Ash or Ivan Kraster from Bulgaria wrote articles raising this problem, what went wrong, and what should liberals learn from the current situation, maybe what they did wrong in the past. And certainly one problem is this gap, what I mentioned, between elites and the people. That's clear, and it maybe happens again and again when political elites somehow lose connection to ordinary people, and populists have this argument and claim, which is very dangerous, and certainly they argue that we represent the people and we should never accept it, but maybe there is something in this logic that elites make their own politics at a different level, and people don't understand, don't follow, and what they see, especially in the modern media, I'm not talking only about the social media, which again changed the world, but also in the traditional mass media, what they see is more a fight between different political groups, but what maybe many could not follow and maybe not so much interested, and it gets to a point when they lose their illusions and they are looking for new solutions. So it might be also a sort of circle what we see when people want to have new political actors. And unfortunately, now these are the populists who are the new actors. So I'm not so sure what went wrong, what is more important in this story, what we have to discuss. Was it simply bad luck in a way, and we did everything well, or we did a lot of mistakes, and it's not about bad luck, but because of our failures. It's also a sort of my obsession when we talk about Viktor Orbán. Do we have a special bad luck in Hungary because of one person who is charismatic and was able to mobilize people against the old regime, the new democracy? And I think that the role of the personalities are certainly very important. So maybe Hungary has a special bad luck. But now Orbán is not alone anymore, so I had to rephrase this argument that unfortunately we have Orbán and that's it, because now a lot of countries follow, especially Poland. So maybe Orbán was just the first, and now he's a sort of internationally well-known infamous hero of populism, because many others realize that Orban should be too many. But I will speak a little bit more about populism if I have time. Please stop me whenever I have to stop. But another point, what here talking about what went wrong, and maybe that's a special point in itself, that is this East-West divide. Since many of you actually come from Western countries, from well-developed democracies. Yes, please.
No, just said I come from this.
Okay, you, for example. But I think that most of the people here in the room come from, not from the region or from Hungary, but from Austria, from the Netherlands, England, etc. Austria, certainly. I can put this question, I can raise this question in different forms. Does the East, now using this term, Eastern part of the European Union, and the West differ really so much that that we should talk about a cleavage, a divide? And certainly there are some arguments saying that history is different, communism certainly played a role, even the interwar period was different. Many countries in Central and Eastern Europe were allied with Hitler. Actually, Hungary, for example, the very last country which supported Germany. So maybe history matters. I'm sure it matters, and there is maybe no, determinism. I would fight against this idea, but there is what sociologists call a path dependency. Certainly, history matters. And in Hungary, where 100 years ago, again, another anniversary, Hungary lost 2/3 of its territory after the First World War. This sentiment is still here, Maybe it's history, for me it's history, but for many Hungarians it's something very emotional and still, vivid, still with us. So that there are differences, history, for example. Also, in a way, mentality, values.
Can I ask a question during the presentation?
I would prefer maybe at the end, if it's not very important. Thank you. But if it's very important, then okay. Mentality, values, all the social surveys show that there is a sort of gap between eastern part and the western part. I wouldn't overestimate this gap, but there is some. So when talking about tolerance, about multiculturalism, a lot of identity issues, there is some sort of gap. And certainly Western societies are much more open than the eastern part of the European Union. Also, some other issues, the strength of civil society, for example, which is now a crucial issue regarding the Orban regime. Especially in Hungary, it seems to be that the civil society, that also means the level of critical thinking and activism in politics or in public affairs is much lower than in traditional Western democracies. Maybe not in Poland, so we have to be careful. Polish history is again very different, also under communism. So maybe we shouldn't generalize what we shouldn't generalize. But I would prefer a sort of gradual approach, and I shouldn't overemphasize these differences, because on the other hand, certainly there is a strong emotion in Hungary, in Poland. Still group of people, political parties, sentiment in Budapest, everywhere, what you can again touch, that people don't like, for example, this Orban regime. It's another question, and we might talk about the problems of the opposition, why they cannot win, and how Orban can gain still a majority. But it's not true that people just follow this illiberal, political doctrine without hesitation, accepting what's going on. So it's a mixture. It's a differentiated country with very different views. and which certainly gives hope, what I started with that one day this regime will collapse. Okay, so in spite of the differences, and now there's another point, that certainly because populism has grown in the Western well-established democracies as well, I think we all know that this is not an Eastern problem, especially not a Central European problem, but it's a general problem, what we should do with populism. But I wanted to raise this question, but I forgot it, but already we are over, just still want to raise it. Was enlargement of the European Union a mistake? Bringing in these Eastern countries into the EU, and certainly as a Hungarian, my reply would be it was not a mistake. The mistakes were made later, when Hungary, Poland and other former communist countries, new democracies, candidate countries, joined the European Union. And you all know this story, that the conditions, the criteria, which country can remain a member state in the European Union. That was a new problem, and the EU was not prepared. And maybe we don't have time to discuss all what happened since Orbán got to power in 2010. There were 6 or 7 resolutions by the European Parliament condemning the situation in Hungary. So I don't want to say that the EU as such did not anything against this situation, but I think there was, especially retrospectively clear, a mistake when the EU was not able to fight back against Orbán. And these are not the liberals who made this mistake, that's very important certainly, but we should blame especially the European People's Party, the party family of Orbán, and Fidesz still belongs to the EPP, and this problem with the Central European University seemed to be a sort of last, last issue when the EPP proclaimed that it would never accept that the CEU should leave Hungary, and now it seems to be that again the EPP accepted now this fact. Actually, we will see. Maybe the story is not over. We will see what will happen after the European elections. Whether Orbán can stay in the EPP, whether Orbán wants to stay in the EPP, whether Orbán wants to join and be the real leader of a populist international, but that's another story. So, and it's not what I'm talking about, that what mistakes the EU, especially the EPP, made until now. Okay, so I will try to finish very soon. The title of the conference, I mentioned it yesterday, is a little bit serious, but also ironic, the bright future of liberalism. But I think what we mean by that, who had the idea to have this event yesterday and today, was that actually we still live in a liberal world. We shouldn't be so, pessimistic, or we shouldn't give up saying that populists are coming and that's a new era. Well, they haven't won yet. That they have certainly positions in some governments. They might be relatively doing well in May 2019, but nobody predicts that they would win. And I think this time we will not see something what happened at the Brexit referendum or at the election of Trump. We have to be careful, but I think it's still this time we should be more confident saying that they cannot break through. And then we have another couple of years to strengthen the liberal order worldwide, or at least inside the European Union, and make progress and go forward towards a more and more united Europe, towards a more federal Europe, if you want. So I think what we have to do, or our parties should do, or our traditional political elites should do, is a combination of having the liberal values, what we discussed, still seriously. No concessions to the populists, but also a renewal, having in mind all the problems what we have, not stick on one special tendency inside the liberal family. I would prefer to say liberalisms, and maybe to play with different ideas inside the liberal family. I just mentioned austerity politics. I think no one should be, as someone said yesterday, a doctriner, arguing that that was the only way how we dealt with Greeks, let's say. It should be an open debate. What mistakes were made, or what could have been done, and what we should do in case there is another Greece, problem of Greece, I mean, coming in another country. Whether different methods of crisis management might work better. I think nobody should argue that this is the only way how crisis management can be accepted. I think it's not a liberal way. So when there is an open debate inside the liberal family, and here, as I said, I see a task for the ALDE individual members to go on with such internal or broader debates, then we don't show a picture of fanatic, market-oriented people who do not want to deal with the problems of the real people. This rhetoric of the populist is very dangerous, because there, as in many cases, there is some truth in some arguments against liberals. I wouldn't share it, but I feel that a lot of people might think that it's true. So finally, what I want to say that actually even if we see that there is a decline regarding democracy, rule of law, the strength of the liberal political regime in this region, and there are a lot of risks or threats even in the traditional western part of the European Union. The game is not over. So now we face the European elections, and I think that all of us have different tasks. I think we discussed yesterday that in Hungary, where we have a very weak liberal opposition, momentum is doing better and better, but it's still a young party. Unfortunately, Danis and Kotka are not here now, and it's very promising what they are doing, but at the last elections in April they got 3%. I think we can agree, because we discussed whether it was 2.8 or 3.2, but I did not check still. We should check, but I don't exactly remember. Around 3%. And Anett represents an even smaller political party, actually, the Liberális Sok, as we say in Hungarian, the Hungarian Liberal Party. And I don't know about the future of that party, how it will develop, but we should talk about it honestly. So there is a problem in Hungary, there are problems in many other countries. Maybe Poland is in a much more situation again. In Romania we have a new liberal party. Slovakia is very different. Slovakia is a member state of the Eurozone, and it wouldn't, what I want to say, because we are in Visegrad, that neither the Czech Republic, at least until Babiš is a real problem for the ALDE family, until Babiš got to power, and Slovakia, neither of these countries accepted at the end the proposal of Orbán and Kaczynski to create a regional counterbalance to the European Union. Orbán even talked about a counter-revolution, a cultural counter-revolution against the European Union, which should be presented by this V4 cooperation. And there was a risk 1 or 2 years ago, and especially at the very peak of the refugee crisis, that since that has been, and maybe even today in Hungary at least, the dominating political narrative by the government, either you support migrants, illegal migrants, or you are against the European Union, which wants to enforce illegal migrants, probably terrorists, into Hungarian soil. So if there is a cleavage, we are lost. And Orban and Kaczynski, especially Orban, pushed this agenda, but the Slovaks and the Czechs finally did not accept it. So now we might maybe speak about V2+2, which is a much better situation regarding our liberal values. And maybe it will not work as Orban hoped to work. But it's again very important, and I think that Macron tries to fight against this and he was just in Slovakia having very good talks with Slovak leaders not to allow Orban and Kaczynski to base an illiberal, anti-democratic political course on a regional basis, because then we will get back to an East-West divide, and that's certainly very dangerous. So what we have to do, I think, is an open debate about the past, whether we made mistakes or not, and a very, combative way, fight back against populists. I had no time to talk about what is populism, but you all have your own views. But to fight back against these forces, which are certainly dangerous, which are in power in Hungary and Poland, so it's even more dangerous here, certainly. Again, look at this. But everywhere in Europe, most of you come from Western Europe, you should explain what's going on in case an illiberal populist political force gets to real power. So thank you for your attention.
We know we have one question, at least.
Daniel,
Daniel?
you still have
Daniel,
that
yes.
question, or it was
Yeah.
answered?
Yes.
I still have a question. I made a very short, quick and dirty view. So please understand that my analysis is quick and dirty, but I want to hear your viewpoint on it. If I look at the European soccer contest, then I see the Eastern European countries. They are much more male, cultural, fighting spirit than, let's say, Holland and Belgium and actually in France. So from that perspective, isn't the liberals, how we act, and also with the presentation we had, what we want, aren't we too weak for the Central European mass people?
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't we be more powerful, like the populist statements, that we are really strong? Is that, so the question is, what do you think about this viewpoint?
So you said that in soccer, you said soccer?
Yeah, the soccer, the European
That the East, Central Europe,
sorry,
yes.
my apologies, Central European
Yeah.
countries, they are much more, my viewpoint is much more fighting, stronger, passion.
But soccer was just an analogy.
Yes, it's
You
an
do not
analogy.
mean it seriously.
He means a masculine,
Yeah, masculine,
masculine
Yeah.
dominant
Intellectual.
versus
No, I'm just protesting a little
culture
bit. Yeah.
difference.
Yeah,
That's why, and
Yeah.
liberal is more
yeah. I
masculine,
understand. Yeah.
feminine,
Uh,
so maybe it doesn't fit
yeah.
our way of presenting that
Yeah.
what in the Central European
Yeah. Yeah.
question mark.
No, just coming back to soccer, because that's very important. Because in the 50s, many of you might know, we had the golden team, the Hungarian golden team, which with Puskás and others, and that team was technically fantastic. So that's my only point, that it's we have a different tradition too. Even during the 50s, when the most terrible period of communism, the golden team was a fantastic, technically perfect team, and it was not masculine. And it's still, you can check on YouTube when Hungary beat England. That was the, as we say, the match of the century in '53, 6-3 against England in Wembley. Have a look at this match. That's a fantastic play in style, in techniques, how the Hungarians win. But I understand your question, and certainly mass...
national identity at that time, 53 after the war, it's like Germany 54.
Next year we lost against Germany, and that was a national catastrophe for Hungary. 2 years before the...
Let's skip the soccer.
Let's skip soccer.
You're running out of time.
We have no much time. Yeah. But I want to just answer your question seriously, that masculinism is certainly an important issue, especially when we talk about Orban. Orban doesn't understand when you suggest a political dialogue with Hungary, or institutional, process or procedures, or just anyone who shows a gesture. I respect your values, Mr. Prime Minister, and you are a European Democrat, but let me say, that's not the language what you understand. You have to say, this is disgusting what you are doing, and now we introduce whatever sanctions. So from that perspective, the only way is to be rough and hard and fight back, actually like Verhofstadt is doing now, and many others should join Verhofstadt and others, show that this is totally unacceptable. This is only the last drop, It's certainly what happened in the last 9 years. And you can check the resolutions of the European Parliament, what I mentioned. There is a list, also in the very last resolution, when the Sargentini report suggested to introduce Article 7 against Hungary. This list is still there again and again, so it's not over. But Orban might argue, oh, we have been screened by the European institutions, now we are nice. What are you talking about? You attack us because we do not want migrants. So that's a very simplistic, primitive logic. So the EU should say, no, that's about you. It's not about Hungary, and that's very important. But maybe that's my last point. A couple of years ago, there was a debate in Hungary whether is this good if the European Parliament condemns the Hungarian government. If there is criticism all over in Europe in the international media, would it help Orban, or would it help the opposition or the opposition-minded people? Now this debate is over. There is one guy, Annette knows him very well, also very nice guy, Tamás Messerich, who is a member of the European Parliament. He will not be the representative of Green Party. Politics might be different in Hungarian, lehet más a politika. He was a professor at the Central European University before. And he decided, when there was a vote on the Sargentini report in the European Parliament, which condemned Hungary, as you know, Hungarian government, he decided not even to abstain, but not to vote. He left the room. It was not clear why. His arguments were, well, it's still about Hungary, sort of emotional, maybe a little bit nationalistic position. Also, he said it's not the role of the European Parliament, but the European Commission should deal with it. Well, this was, for me, an institutional blah blah. I think he found it because he was in a very strange position inside his party, which had no idea what to do. And Messerich certainly has a Facebook page for his supporters, and what he got there, what sort of attacks from ordinary Hungarians, that you are coward, you support Orban, now we know that your party supports Orban. So this polarization is so hard that either you are with Orban or you are against Orban. And nobody accepts anymore this argument that if the European Parliament condemns the Hungarian government, it's against Hungary. This rhetoric works only for the Fidesz people, but not for anybody else, I think for the majority who follows politics. So I think this debate is over, and that is one reason why I would even more support that the reaction of the European Union should be masculine, to use your word.
So Timmermans has to do Krav Maga and come here.
Yeah.
Yes,
Very good.
Annette,
Two
please.
questions here already. So,
Ladies first.
yeah, ladies first. That's very easy. This one. Yeah.
Thank you.
An analytic answer, because when we could go to the future.
So 20 seconds. Yeah.
But what happened with the different, very strong liberal parties in Hungary? Why this could disappear totally?
Yeah.
What happened?
we
I'm
don't-
not talking about Fidesz,
Yeah.
it's a special story, but the other one,
Free Democrats, the
Free
SDS,
Democrats, Tomsky and so on.
Sorry?
The mayor of Budapest.
Dembski, yeah. Well, very shortly,
Yeah.
they made probably many mistakes, including getting too close to the socialists. They lost their identity, and at the end they committed a collective suicide, fighting against each other in a small party. That's a short answer.
Normal politics.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you were talking about this special bad luck of Hungary,
Yeah.
but if you go through our history, we had this special bad luck several times. So I think that it happened because our society has never had the chance to learn what does it mean to be a citizen. What does it mean to fight for itself? So what do you think? Do we have the chance to change this with, I don't know, with small civil groups or with bigger movements to change the mind of people and to make them believe that they can change something?
May I ask one question before I get confused?
Yeah.
I'm not going to say your name, I'm too
István.
he said like, well, the Brexit and the FBO and the Italian five-star movement, Lega Nord, Lega, proved that Hungary is not the only one with bad cards. So do you, by saying this, do you believe that Hungary is the weird one with the weird cards, or do you agree that this is just how media works and populism pops up when they have a chance? When
I think that this was a good wave for populism all around in Europe, not just in Europe but in the whole world. And I think that it was a really easy task for doing this with the Hungarian society, because we never knew what does it mean to be a citizen with rights, to fight for our own freedom, because there were lucky moments when István was also over there with young people, with young movements at the time of the regime change, when nearly the whole society understood something, that this is good to go in the direction of Western Europe, in the direction of freedom or maybe responsibility taking. But I'm not sure that we really understood, or the Hungarian
you have to
society
work harder,
understood.
that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
You have to work harder. Yeah, okay, sorry,
I try to be very short. I still say that Orban is I used to say Hungary is a unique case 8 years ago. Now it's not a unique case anymore, but maybe it's a special case because we somehow still had bad luck how politics changed. Don't forget that Orban was a mainstream politician. He was a liberal. When I was in Fidesz, we were in a liberal party, and I left in '94. Anett mentioned my political past, and I left '94 when Fidesz moved to the right, but it was still a conservative party, and joined the EPP later. But now it's not a conservative party anymore, as we see. So it's a strange story when a mainstream party, a former liberal party, later conservative, now becomes a populist party. And in that sense, it was I think, a unique story. Kaczynski created a party already on a relatively right agenda when he left his former party. And most Western European parties we see, they were fringe parties and now getting, unfortunately, more and more mainstream parties. This is a special story. And maybe that's the reason why Orban was first. That was the logic of the development of Fidesz. But I am not so pessimistic like you. I think that, if I can describe it this way, I'm sorry. But I think that Hungarians actually had a sort of, how we say that, an aha feeling in 1989-90. I think later it was a mistake not to use this historic regime change in the rhetoric of the liberals, of the liberal Free Democrats. Certainly the right tried to rewrite, everybody tried, but especially the right-wing parties, rewrite history using such an anti-communist language, which somehow also undermined the real story of '89, which was more a transitional, peaceful, legal event, but also people were on the streets. And people very often forget that there were a lot of people when the reburial of the executive prime minister Imre Nagy in '89. There were almost 200,000 people on the street demonstrating and bringing, you know, respect to the martyrs of the '56 revolution, which was another even more important historic event. So I doubt that this argument that people did not participate would be so crucial. Many of them actually participated, but the political elites made a mistake later on not to use these historic events against the populists. But you know, because Orbán was the first, you can learn from this story that maybe traditional Hungarian political elites, the Democrats, the liberals, were not prepared how to fight against Orbán. Many, even if you remember, my last sentence, if you remember the debates in 2009, 2010, even some liberals believed that, okay, Orbán will come back. You know, he was prime minister already between 1998 and 2002. Okay, he might have a two-third majority, no problem. Now he would finally complete our task. His rhetoric is sometimes strange. I wouldn't vote for him, but no problem. That was it. So very few people understood what a danger Orbán would mean if he gets to power with a two-third majority.
Yeah, so there's a good learning curve for us all,
Exactly.
inside enemy.
Yeah.
You had that question already, like in the first.
I have one anecdotal comment. As you know, we are called here in Hungary Shogor, which means
Yes.
brother-in-law,
Yeah.
so that we have some
Schwager.
similarity of small countries who used to be big countries.
Yeah.
And we have the same football event. The two had also in the year when Hungary became so strong, we were at least third in the World Championship. We had beaten London in the British in Wembley, and we even have beaten the Germans.
Yeah.
So in this respect, we are quite fine.
Once in a lifetime.
This is the
Of course. And from now on, we're not going to talk about soccer anymore.
No, it's all good.
You want to say something about tennis?
Now,
No, you want to say it was an introduction.
now you mentioned the mistake of the European Union. We should think about it. And you were not the first who were turning to the right, but it was Austria. And we had this coalition between the conservatives and the right wing. And now, what was the big mistake? The European Union decided, okay, we are going to sanction Austria. After they had no concept. After 3 months, they were thinking about how do we get out of it? Instead of being strong, instead of holding strong. And since that moment, yeah, the European Union has no weapon anymore. And in order to get even weaker, we had Schüssel, the chancellor, who made this coalition, the conservative, writing the Article 7. So it's never going to work, because you need the unanimous decision. So Europe made the mistake to take out of their hand all weapons they had. And that was one of the crucial mistakes. Now, the second thing is about the cleavage, it comes to my question now, about the cleavage between East and West. My question is, did it not decrease? Because looking at the anti-democratic illiberal movements, first it was just Austria started, then we got Italy under Berlusconi, and now with the new government, and then we have a lot of Western democracies who turn towards the illiberal side, and I would say it decreases. And now comes my historical question. Don't you think that we have something like a pendulum? At least in the West we had the experience when it became too liberal, there was an anti-reaction to it, which led to a sort of an illiberal democracy. But I think it's still a democracy. So we still have the chance to vote them out, to chase them, to do the worst thing possible. Would you agree that we are now in a moment, we speak about a bright future of liberalism because the pendulum is going to go to the other side?
Very complicated question.
I'm going to sit down.
Yeah, try to improvise a little bit. But certainly what happened recently in many Western democracies is also a decrease of a level of democracy, and populists have become much stronger. So in that respect, this East-West divide doesn't work anymore. But there is also another story that during these 30 years of, or 20-some years of liberal democracy in Central Europe, in the post-communist countries, these societies have also changed. And referring to the question of Anett, again, I think that we live in a very different society in Hungary than under the communist Kádár era. So a lot of westernization, Europeanization actually went through, which were maybe not deep enough to stop Orban. But I think you're right that somehow we are more, you know, we have a common problem now. It's not an Eastern or a Western problem. You also move towards more illiberal tendencies, and we have our story, which also moved to that. So now we are in the same box, and whether it's a pendulum or what, I don't know. But I would agree with the idea that populism based on identity politics is a sort of counter-revolution. Takis Papas, for example, a political scientist, calls it, so it's also in the literature, it's not only a journalistic term, that it's a counter-revolution against the traditional elites because of very different reasons. There is a huge debate. I just mentioned part of the problems. But if it's a counter-revolution, you might call it, you might use this analogy of the pendulum. But again, I am sure that the support for these counter-revolutionary forces is limited. And we have all the chances to stop it and bring the pendulum back.
Okay, well, pendulum, we don't need to stop it, it goes by
Yeah.
itself. That's great. I want your two questions in at once, is that okay? So you ask them, and then he answers them, hopefully combined, because we're really out of time.
Yes.
Well, first I remark, I also consider that there is no particular bias in Hungary in terms of being democratic compared to the West. And I've been living here for the last 6 years, coming from Italy. I know that Italy is not Western Europe, it's more Southern Europe, it's a different culture as well. But still, I don't see a lot of, in terms of the Hungarian. A little bit in terms of, more in terms of pessimism. That's something probably, you may see that worse because of the pessimistic angle that you may have more. But my point is another. Don't you think that Europe as an institution is too weak? I mean, what is going to happen now with the Article 7 trigger? First of all, it's not going anywhere. Even though it can pass through the concept that it's never going to happen, the consequences are practically nothing.
Well,
I mean, nobody is going to really penalize. Nobody is really going to penalize the Hungarian government because of this.
Okay, good
There is
question.
no consequence.
Yes.
Can I make an addendum to that, actually? And it seems to me that the history, of course, is very important. If we look to the very west of the European Union, we've got Ireland, and North Ireland and South Ireland. That is now only 20 years ago that border has disappeared, that there is now peace between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, and that is now a big tendency that it may come back again, and again fighting. So I don't think that between East and West, the cleavage, I think it's really democratically between certain states and certain areas. Of course, you've got the DUP in Northern Ireland, which is tending to sort of aggregate this, or aggravate it, I should say. But coming to Anett's point as well, I think, let's not forget it's now 100 years ago that in 1918, that there was the, or 1920, when you had the Trianon, yes. And of course that was again, so I think from that point of view, you have many, should we say, decades or times of people of actually getting over this, and of course I think the Hungarians still haven't really got over this problem. They're still actually in the psyche, and I think that is one of the problems that actually is in the psyche of Hungary. But I think that is the aspect, it seems to me, that there is not a cleavage between the West and East of Europe, but that, it seems to me, underlines it.
Well, good luck combining these two questions.
Yeah, right. Try to be very short. Concerning Article 7, I just mentioned the a different scenario, which is possible. What if the Polish government fails at the next elections? And then through the, you mentioned the council, and then the process goes on. At the end, nobody would support Hungary, perhaps Italy. But that's another, we don't know. So I can imagine it a 2 years long process. If Hungary goes into that direction, at the end Article 7 might work. Whether it's enough, whether it's
but
good.
my point is that
Yes.
even though it passes, what are the consequences?
Well, the consequences might be, first of all, one consequence which is independent from Article 7, that's what I mentioned, the EPP. If Orbán is out, whether he leaves EPP or whether he is kicked out, it creates a clear situation. These are the mainstream political forces. At least for Hungarians it would be very important. The opposition, because certainly change should come from inside especially, the opposition, this messiah who comes from London, you remember, might argue that, you see, Orbán has totally isolated Hungary inside the European Union, and still the people actually are still in a huge numbers in favor of EU membership. They still look at the West as a pattern, still it hasn't changed. So a good and brave, courageous opposition might use this opportunity. You see, Orbán is out, he belongs to the extremists, it's now evident, you cannot argue any other way. So that's one point. Certainly Article 7 might lead at the end to some sanctions. And that's again a question, but as I mentioned, what was the reaction to the Green politicians abstain in the European Parliament, I think that those who support the opposition, and there are a lot of swing voters in between, and that comes to the problem of nationalism, these swing voters might be also again convinced that's what's happening, sanctions or whatever, is because of Orbán, and not because of Verhofstadt or the EU. That's our hope, that's such talented opposition politicians in Hungary might argue that we are not alone. It's not just because I hate Orbán, because I had a problem with him 30 years ago, but the whole, civilized world sees and introduces sanctions against our country because of him. If you can change this rhetoric, it might mobilize people that he is the problem, because he's like Erdogan, Putin, everybody knows, and that's unacceptable.
Yeah, but he holds the communication at the end. At the end, it's going to throw the message that the sanction is how the bad Europe is punishing the Hungarian population.
Yes,
so it's going to be even worse.
But that's the fight, and I'm arguing that we can win this conflict, arguing in a...
It's a refugee giving a yellow card, and of course the player will say, I was not to blame. Yeah.
May I just very, very quickly react to the other question?
You went over 3/4 of time, so...
Yes.
It's just about nationalism, it's not about the Irish problem. That again, I think that although there was a shift towards more right-wing nationalist ideas maybe in the whole region, but again, Trianon seemed to be not such a big issue in the 90s. Only a right-wing circle, maybe 20% of the electorate, found it so important. And I think it hasn't changed so much. It was only Hungary which did not participate at the big memorial in Paris. It was only Hungary. There are so many countries which lost territories, which lost wars. Don't forget Germany. So, it's a very narrow-minded argument again that we Hungarians suffered 100 years ago, and again, a courageous liberal on horse, you remember, this guy could argue that this is bullshit and we live in a different world. That was the rhetoric of the 90s actually, that we opened the borders, Hungarian in Slovakia, in Romania, in Transylvania. Now we can get connections because we don't, and that's because of the European Union. This rhetoric is still valid actually. So I wouldn't give up saying that, so we all have to go into a nationalist rhetoric. No, we should fight back.
Okay, thank you very much. What I'm proposing to win some time of Carolina agrees on that one. If we all have a 5-minute grabbing coffee, getting cakes. There are a lot of cakes there again. And then if you have the coffee, don't stay there. Clear the room for all the attackers who are going for the coffee machine, and then come back. Right? Shall we do that? So instead of having a real coffee break, it's more
You know, before you all have coffee, we're 5 minutes.
See you
away
later.
anyway. Say again? Oh,
Lovely.
and,